If you see one in the sky, if you see one manifest before your very eyes, if you see a strange creature lurking outside, then tell it on accounts of the paranormal. Hear it on accounts of the paranormal. Welcome to accounts of the paranormal.
Welcome to the show. Tonight we welcome back author Michael Oka for part 2 of his interview, where he picks up on our previous conversation touching on paranormal investigations and a chance run-in he had with a more recent resident of his haunted childhood home. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
Happy to have you back for part 2 here of your interview. Last time we were talking, we left off and we were discussing some of the paranormal work you were getting into and touching on a run-in you had with the more recent resident of your childhood home. Let's get into it. What did you find out?
Well, absolutely. So my brother Mike and we're kind of driving around town and talking about where we grew up and kind of our roots. And I was like, hey, you want to see a place I grew up in? It was horrible. And so we go to the old neighborhood back to West Grand, and I was showing them where we used to park and go in, and we pulled into the driveway, and the current resident there was there. It was like there was the main driveway, and then there was a dirt driveway. That's where we were parked. But she saw us from inside her yard, and she came out and she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Oh, I was just in the neighborhood, and I was showing a buddy of mine where I used to grow up. And I grew up here I lived here for 2 years as a kid, and just wanted him to see." And it was actually she who approached us. She approached with the topic of, well, when you lived here, did anything weird happen? And at the time, even at the time, I was pretty young, early 20s, but I knew that I didn't want to lead in with something suggestive and have it, reinforce something or create something in her mind that would make her go, oh yeah. She asked me, did anything weird ever happen? And my immediate response was, well, weird, like how? And she's like, well, did anything ever happen in the house like scary? And I was like, what do you mean scary? And she's like, and everyone's afraid, right? You don't want to. It's fun to tell ghost stories at a campfire. You sit around the campfire and you tell ghost stories, and it's a good night. You start talking about for ghosts for real, and people might take you for crazy. So we played that back and forth for a minute, and finally she's like, well, did you ever feel like someone was watching you? And that's when I opened up a little bit. I said, yeah, we had some creepy things happen. And she's all like, what? And I was like, well, is it cool if we come talk about it? And she said yes, which was crazy because I'd never met her before. She lived there with her dad and her 2 kids, and they were in their late teens. I think the daughter was oldest. But she invites us to talk to her. She actually also just invites us into the house, which blew my mind because I was already feeling a little bit nervous just sitting there in the driveway the way we were. That house was coming off kind of the way it was when my family and I first moved in there. It was just kind of quiet. But the moment that I put foot on the stairs and walked in the front door, you get this overwhelming feeling of oh, I remember you, like that. Obviously the house doesn't talk. It was just it could have been psychosomatic on my part, but there was just immediately a bad feeling, and that feeling of being recognized by an old adversary. Something you haven't seen in a while that hasn't seen you, but the moment you're in each other's company, you know who the other is. And that's what it felt like. And so she invites us into the living room, and it was uncanny because their living room, I guess there really was only a few ways you could set it up. You've seen the floor prints of the house, but it was set up exactly how my family had it set up. Their kitchen was the same way. It was weird. And she started by saying, she gets the feeling of being watched, and she's really trying to get me to tell her my side of things first. And I don't want to lead in. I don't want to, feed her some information and have her run with it like it was something that happened to her, also the exact same thing. So I was like, well, what do you mean you're being watched? Where's it worse? And she immediately, the kitchen is the worst. It's like the windows in the kitchen are watching. And we had discussed in the last one, it was one of the places in the house all of us just really didn't like being alone the most was in the kitchen. You had those windows right above, the outside there, and it always felt like something was looking in. And that was what she was describing to me without me having to tell her what it was. And we get to talking. I said, well, you ever see anything out there? She said, no, no. I said, you ever see anything in the house? She says, not exactly. And there were a number of things that I really wanted to include in the book that I left out just out of concern that she might see it. I changed her name in the story, but I didn't have necessarily permission from her to give an exact recount. But she said it was mostly just like catching a shadow out of the corner of the eye was her biggest complaint. And for me, that would have been like a cakewalk for what I went through. Her son was in the kitchen, and I remember he had an ironing board out, and he's ironing this big black coat. And I asked him, "You ever see anything?" And he's just like, "Nah, man, I don't want nothing to do with this." He wrote it off, and I was fine with that. We get to back in the living room, and we're talking, and her dad, he's laying on the couch, and I ask him, "What about you? You?" And he says, "Oh yeah, absolutely. Mostly, I hear footsteps, and sometimes it sounds like there's children running back and forth through the living room, and." My mind's going a whirl. I never heard kids, and I start coming up in my head like, is this kind of a residual thing? Is that something an imprint that my sister and I left behind? After we moved out, I guess these people were the ones who moved in after us within a few months, and they had just been there this whole time. So he's telling us, yeah, I hear kids run between here and the den over the other living room where we had kept our computer, and at night he'll hear, he hears people walking through the hallway when everyone's, in bed, and he'll get up and check and no one's there. And he'll be walking through the hallway or through the living room, or even through the hallway, through the living room where he sleeps on the couch and into the kitchen. And he knows there's no one there. And, brave guy. I asked him, does it scare you? He says, it's a little spooky, but I don't know that I'm scared. We get to the daughter though. And she's the one who's having like the worst of it all. Breathing, when she's in the restroom getting ready in the morning, or if she's taking a shower, breathing over her shoulder while she's in the shower, the constant feeling of being watched. And of course, she was sleeping in the bedroom where my sister slept when she saw the Bloody Mary. And we had to switch, remember, but her brother actually had my old room, and her parents had their room, and we started exchanging stories, and she was just telling me she always felt like she was being watched. There was audible, like that was the big thing with her, was audible breathing. And that was something that I didn't experience, thankfully. But, they were telling me every now and then their dog would go through the house. They'd have the dog come inside. They had a little, kind of a little mini dog. I couldn't tell you what the breed was, mutt. But it was, it would sleep on the porch where Stormy used to sleep. And they'd bring it in, and every now and then the dog would cower or bark at nothing. A lot of the typical experiences that my family and I went through. And she told me every now and then she'd hear the doorknob on the door, her bedroom door, it would rattle, or the closet would sound like it was shaking. I asked her, did it ever open? And she said, no, it didn't open, but it sounds like something shaking the closet. And we go through the logical explanations, hey, this house is literally right by the 91 freeway ramp. Are you sure it's not a truck? And they're like, no, this is going on at 1, 2, 3 in the morning. There's no traffic outside, and door handles are trying to turn. Closets are shaking. There's footsteps running through the house. And that's one thing, you can't really mistake for a truck passing by. There's a very deliberate sound with a footstep, especially when it's intentional.
How old is the daughter at this point?
Oh, I had to play. She was close to my age. She had to be around 18 or 19, I would imagine. And the son would have to be somewhere between 17 or 18. Because they were he was still in school. I didn't know what she did. I didn't ask a lot about their personal lives, because I didn't want them to get uncomfortable or push us out when we were in the middle of having what I felt at the time to be kind of a profound exchange, and a very validating exchange. You spend this time as a kid growing up in these places, and everybody's classmate and everybody and their mom has lived in or been in or knows of someone who's had a haunted house. And you never just come out and say it, because when you come out and say it again, you don't want to be branded as crazy or that weird kid who insists there's ghosts. As an adult, I did some work in counterterrorism, and that MMPI test, man, some of the biggest questions are: do you believe in ghosts? Do ghosts haunt you? Do ghosts tell you what to? You don't want to be answering yes to those kind of questions if you want to work in a government entity. So, even in my 20s, I knew, there's a certain level, a certain line you don't cross where you don't push too hard. But it was very validating because she was a legal adult and she was old enough to know truth from fiction. And I had, grandpa, their grandfather who sleeps on the couch. He's up there in years. He's got white hair and he's talking about it, and he doesn't hear the breathing. He's hearing the footsteps. The mom's seeing shadows. She's got to be in her late 40s, maybe mid to late 40s, possibly early 50s. And there's no dad in the house that I see anyway, except grandpa. And best 3 out of 4 of them were all having these separate experiences. So finally, I'm like, well, hey, you guys use the root cellar? Like, no, we locked that. I'm like, you locked it? Like, yeah, we don't go down there. So why? It's because it doesn't feel good down there. When we moved in, we brought whatever we wanted in the house, and the rest of our stuff is in the root cellar. But we don't go down there, and all the stuff that's down there we don't really need. So we just locked it, and we don't go in there. I said, what about the garage? The garage is mostly fine. It's a little eerie sometimes, and the story is about being haunted, but also there was some things, some touchstones there for me that were pretty deep. They let me see the garage, and it was weird. There was there were still some of my dad's stickers on the wall in there, and we if you read the story, he and I had been estranged for a while, and by the time we made up, he was around for a year or so, and he passed. So seeing he worked for McDonnell Douglas, seeing the MD-80 and the Blue Angels stickers on the wall, it was a little bit of a choke up moment. And then they're like, well, you want to see the root cellar? I said, not really. They're like, no, it's cool. You can. And I said, okay, if it's cool with you. And they unlocked the root cellar, and I really don't want to go down there, but I'm going to go down there. And my brother Mike, he's coming down there with me, and it was like swimming through tension walking down there. And if there was oh, I remember you feeling that I got from the house, it was, worse down there. It was like walking into like kind of a waking nightmare. And I know that sounds super dramatic, but it really was. It was like the last place on earth I wanted to be. And I had, over 10 years to process this. I'm in my 20s, and I just don't want to be down there. And nothing actually happened. But my brother made a comment, and it was weird. It was just out of the blue. He's kind of like, there's so many of them here. I said, what? And he's like, yeah, there's too many down here. We got to get out of here. And we go back up, and my arms right now, actually just goose pimples up and down my arm. I'm super uncomfortable. And they're like, so is it spooky down there? I'm like, yeah, it's very uncomfortable. Lock that, close it, don't go down there. And I told you in our first interview, I always thought that was where it kind of, for lack of a better word, where it lived. If there was anything horrible in that house, that place beneath it, that root cellar, which it wasn't paved, there was no concrete. It was like somebody just dug a hole and then built a house over it, and here's where you're going to store your stuff. And it was the worst place in the house to be, besides maybe, my bedroom or my sister's bedroom. But whatever was down there, it made its appearances up there, and they other than shadows and footsteps and that thing about the daughter, though, her breathing, that breathing she heard, even it was especially like when she's like, yeah, when I'm showering, it's like breathing right in my ear, and I thought that was incredibly uncomfortable. Like, I had never experienced that, and I'm probably very fortunate for it. Seeing it. That's very scary, the footsteps, that's very scary, but actually hearing something, manifest a sound in your ear, and I wish I had asked her. I didn't have the wherewithal in my head at the time to ask her, well, does it sound like human breathing? Like, what kind of breathing are we talking about? But unfortunately, and to be, not to disappoint you with how short the visit was, it was only about a half hour's visit, but, we talked a little bit more about the root cellar, and they said, well, what else happened when you lived here? I said, to be honest, my folks divorced. We moved in here with high hopes. We thought we had a new beginning. We were here for a couple years. My folks, they split up after that. And she said, well, do you ever get the feeling like, like it's just evil? And I didn't want to lean into that. I said, I didn't want to be like, well, this house hated us. It probably hates you too. It's the last thing I want to do. But what I will tell you is it was only 30, 45 minutes, and then we were gone. I did return a couple years later, though, and they no longer lived there. And the house itself remained vacant, like no one lived there. until it was taken over and turned into a home business, as we discussed in the last one. I'm not allowed to say the address or what, where exactly it is, but I will say that they turned that root cellar. They did have it paved and turned into a single bedroom apartment and chose to live beneath the house, which I thought was weird. I told my mom about that, and she's like, "What, are they freaking crazy?" Was the only thing she said about it. And yeah, that was my experience. They were there, and then the next time I came to see them, to see how they were doing, they weren't there anymore, and it stayed vacant like maybe a year before I left Corona.
Boy, what I love to speak to the people who live down in that root cellar. Whenever someone does live there, would I love to hear what they might have to say about that. That's crazy.
Oh man, and well, that same day I told you it's in the book, but the same day I did found our little paranormal research society at the time, and when someone finally, when the business finally did move in there, I did attempt to contact them, and I had mentioned in the book, this Margie May person, considered herself a white witch, happened to be real close friends with someone who lived in the house, or at least his wife. And from what she told me in our email correspondence, number one, she's like, stay away from them. You're going to scare them. And she let slip that the wife was already uncomfortable moving in. She said that the house didn't feel right, But now I'm getting third-hand information from somebody who is intentionally trying to withhold, access to these people. And I want to help. I want to see what's going on. And I would think that was part of my hubris as a young man. By this time that I'm telling, this part of the story where we're involved with Margie May, I'm 26 or 27. I'm getting ready to move out of Southern California, within a year, and she won't let me close to them. And she's telling me what's going on. And we went through and we smudged the house, and yeah, a few cupboards banged, but I drove it out, and whatever was in there, it's not in there anymore. And the house is clean, and they want to go on with their lives, and I don't want you coming near them. So I respected that, and because they're running a business out of it, I can't approach them or the media or anyone else around them, because I don't want to damage a business or convince any of their clientele that they're walking into a weird place. But when I talked to my mom about the fact that, it was a psychiatric clinic, it was like a place you go to talk to a therapist, When I told her, yeah, she says, well, do you think that like people who bring that negativity inside there, do you think that it's gone, or do you think they're feeding whatever's there? And I didn't have an answer to that. To close this part of the story out, though, I did end up moving. I ended up moving to Central California, and sometime in mid late October, around somewhere between like the 18th or 20th or something like that. I'm not sure. Mid late October, I get an email from this Margie May lady, and I haven't heard from her in a while. And the email is in all caps. It's panic, like it is panic striking. And she's like, did the things that happened in your house begin in October? Which they did, my whole story begins in October as a 10-year-old. And when I went to go and visit that second family that divulged so much information, that trusted me, in their house, that was in October. And it was, years later in October, did it happen in the house? What was going on? I'm afraid that the husband is falling ill and there's no good reason. And I wrote her back and I asked, hey, will you tell me what's going on? I can't help you. I'm in Central California now. I don't know what to say, but I would like to know what's gone. Maybe reach out to them and see what's happening. I don't know what I could do to help. And she never wrote me back. I wrote her a couple of times, and then eventually I got a mailer demon, and it bounced back. She was an older woman, though. She was in her late 50s when she started communicating with me, and she doesn't have any social media. I can't track her. What used to be through strangeusa.com, we used to talk, but that website's now defunct. She doesn't have a presence on Facebook, Instagram, or anywhere else. And, good for her if she just decided I'm going to cut off my social media, because, that's a whole different topic of plague unto itself. But when it came time to, try and help, I couldn't get through. I couldn't reach her. And that was the last message that I received, was that someone was inexplicably getting sick living in that house. And I haven't since then tried to reach out.
It's really interesting. Something you mentioned going back here about the grandfather that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said that he had heard children running up and down the halls, and your thought, it is funny because that was exactly my first thought. It's like, how crazy if that was actually some kind of an imprint from young Michael and his sister all those years earlier. That's funny you mentioned that, because that's something I had thought of, like an impression that you guys had left there, because I don't believe you had said you had hurt children, right?
Never once. But and we recount that. And the last one I mentioned that, I don't remember what I called it the story. I want to say it's Darlene or something, but she had mentioned, that she had seen a woman sitting on my father's bed, but the woman she described wasn't my mom. And having, I told you that day, I ended up going to my buddy's dad owned a Foster's Freeze. I come zooming like a bat out of the hell with my brother into the parking lot, just as he and his girlfriend at the time are coming in like a bat out of the hell. And they had just discovered or experienced something really weird too. I don't know what it was because we never discussed it, but we like formed right then and there, like, we got to know what's going on, guys, like kind of a Scooby-Doo gang. We're kids. We have no clue what's going on in the world. We don't know how the paranormal works, but we did discover, one thing is we don't think that anybody actually knows. You talk about experts on the paranormal. You see it back in the old days when it was more prevalent on TV. You see expert on the afterlife, Sylvia Brown, expert on the paranormal, experts on the afterlife. And you ask yourself, well, at least in my experience, when you're an expert on something, there's so many hours involved, but also there's a field of study where you have to do a hands-on experience. And if you didn't die and go to Afterlife University and come back, I don't know that you're an expert. We can't see these things. I don't know what these things really look like, and I don't know that I want to. I saw a decrepit, rotting woman behind my door, and I know for sure that that's not what they look like. That's what they want to look like when they're trying to scare you out of your pants, or whatever my poor sister saw that came out of her closet that she described as not Bloody Mary, the Bloody Mary, like, the Bloody Mary. That's not what they look like. And I can't, and in recounting on what my brother said, there's too many of them. Like the idea that it was crowded down there, hey, was it one that just wore different faces, or was there many? And then you get to the more disturbing part, is this idea that there was an imprint, which is often, I believe it's called like with the old protocol called recurrent spontaneous psychokinetic activity, which is just a fancy way of saying, you're watching a holographic video of something that's passed before. In the story, I mentioned it in the very beginning that when I was very little, I saw a green, like, ghost-like, we were down the street from the railroad tracks, and I saw a green, like, ghost-like homeless man, sitting there talking to someone that I couldn't see. And as a kid, I remember I could still feel the cold glass pane against my cheek, staring down the street when I'm supposed to be in bed. And I've got to be 4 or 5, man. I'm not that old when this is happening. But even then, I knew that it wasn't really there. And it wasn't there in the way that something intelligent is. And it disturbs me, because like that leads into the same, the thing about me and my sister, and was he listening to an imprint we left behind, is that the fact that a place like that can absorb that kind of memory. Because she and I, we were brother and sister. We fought a lot, sure. But like, we were also each other's only real friends besides the kids in the neighborhood. And we had these kids that lived down the street and around the corner from us. And they they spoke passable English, but communication was often difficult. We didn't have a lot of friends in the neighborhood, so we were each other's friends, and we did run back and forth throughout the house, and we laughed. And that's the thing, is he heard that, when he said, I hear children and they're running back and forth. These kids that he hears are playing in it, and it kind of mortified me when he told me that, because just like, that was your first impression, is could that be an imprint? It was the same as things. Did the house keep a piece of us there, and not necessarily spiritually, but just a memory of us kept locked in those walls, being activated by other people in the house. And that was part of, some of the things when you talk about like paranormal research and development, I think that you probably have better, like maybe better street cred saying that you're an expert, because how do you research something you can't see, and how can you develop proof, and instead of attacking it head on, instead of saying, yeah, we're ghost hunters, we can verify your place is haunted. We can't. What we can do is we could come in like your local cable guy and provide you a service. We're going to come in and we're going to handle things, unfortunately from a logical perspective, because if the paranormal were something you could prove, it wouldn't be paranormal. It would just be normal. But what we can do is we'll look up the history of the house. Is this property sitting on, salt deposit, bedrock, magnetite, anything that could possibly provide strange energy signatures, things like that. And there was, unfortunately, especially for that house, like I told you in the last one, there's no real history that I could find prior to the person who lived there before my family and I moved in. Everything before that, I couldn't turn up anything. I'm talking about like a paid subscription, finding the history of a house. Nothing. It was like the worst $25 I've ever wasted, and just kind of creeps through my skin when I think about like Grandpa's laying there and he might be listening to the last tenant that were in that house, what my dad's girlfriend saw, who had that been, because it didn't move, it didn't react to her, it didn't think, it wasn't what old protocol researchers will call an intelligent haunting. And I think that's the only thing that my Paranormal Research and Development Society is what we call ourselves now. That's the only thing that we do agree on, is that there's maybe two kinds. There's the intelligent haunting and the non-intelligent hauntings. And where we diverge is we don't use occult tools. There's going to be no Ouija board, no pendulum, no divining rods, because there is a proven science behind the pendulum, micro muscle movements in your fingers, and you can sit there and just stare at it and think forward, and the pendulum moves forward. So how can you discern your own answers, or even subconscious answers that you want from something that is affecting it from an outside force? They say, oh, if it swings clockwise, the answer is yes, or if it swings counterclockwise, the answer is no. And I had an uncle, God rest his soul, who had come to the house when I was a kid before the problem started, and he had taught me how to do it with a magnet. And he told me, he says, this isn't magic, this isn't a spiritual thing. This is the power of your mind. He was very big, so was my dad, on mind over matter. And he was just showing me that if you hang an object, and it doesn't really have to be a magnet, it could be literally anything. If you hang an object that's heavy enough to make a piece of string taut, and you hold your elbows together and you hold your hands together and stare at it, and you start thinking about the direction you want it to move, it is going to move in that direction. And so, as we did the paranormal R&D, we started trying to say, okay, well, if we can't rely on these things, what can we rely on? Well, we need to start thinking backwards. And we don't want to take the fun factor out of hauntings, but I also don't personally believe that a haunting is fun. It was always the first question we asked clientele who would contact us. Number one, we tell them, your information, confidential. We're never going to we'll release our findings. We won't release your name, your address, who you are. We will release that we did an investigation, and here were the results. But the first question you ask, do you want your house to be haunted? Because there's people out there who think, yeah, I'd love to be haunted. You tell a story like the West Grand haunting, and people are like, oh, that sounds like it was fun. No, it was horrifying. I was a child that lost sleep, and when people say they want to be haunted, those are the people that actually get mad when you come in and you're like, okay, so here's what we've got. We've got an extremely high amount of electromagnetic radiation coming out of these particular areas. How old is your house? Oh, our house was built in 1922. Okay. And then we explain things like, well, electromagnetic radiation can cause things like feelings of dread. It can also cause auditory and visual hallucination. I noticed you guys have a fish tank in the other room, and you've got a pump running. That can cause auditory pareidolia, where the babbling sound, the human mind, it's so complex and yet so entirely easy to lie to, that the sound you're hearing, your mind can't make sense of something. It forces it to make sense. It's staring at the stucco on the wall until you see a dog or a shape or a cloud. Oh, that looks like a chicken, or that looks like a cow. Your mind rejects these chaotic images and turns it into something you recognize. So when we come in and someone's like, yeah, I want my house to be haunted, I think it'd be cool. When you tell them, okay, well, here's what we think it is, they get mad. And then you get the flip side of it. The clientele are like, well, we don't want our house to be haunted. Who in their right mind would want that? We come through, and our goal now is, just kind of putting your mind at ease. Let's look at everything that it could be and prove that it isn't before we jump to conclusions. They say, okay, well, we have a camera in our bedroom. We set it up because we were hearing movement, and we saw some dust particles, man. We saw some orbs, is what they call it. We saw orbs, and we had long ago discounted orbs. We determined, there's a few things that can cause it. Silica particles, which is just dust, will refract light, especially under a night vision lens. and moisture particles, And out here in northern Nevada with our last clientele, they're like, well, we don't have it. We just dust it. We clean. I said, yeah, but you guys live in the middle of this desert and you've got some arboreal stuff, but every time the wind picks up, it's going in your air vents. And what I'm looking at on this video, I'm telling you, I'm seeing a dust particle. It's floating along a specific current. I point out the vent in the room, and the direction the air is blowing is consistent with the direction these particles are moving. They're, well, what about our closet door just opening? I said, well, that's an easy one. Let's get in there and take a look at this. And, we close it and it's shut. And I just 1 inch at a time, until the door just slides open. And then we go down and we measure, the tracks. And the tracks they're slightly off, and it's causing the closet door to slide open. I said, well, you could be comfortable in that. Well, what about our bathroom? Same thing. They had a sliding bathroom door. It was a real pretty bathroom. And it was the top track was just slightly higher when I put a level on it. And it showed that the door was sliding open. And I said, okay, well, I'm not seeing these things, let's go into the living room. You told the wife in this investigation tells us, well, I got this enormous migraine while I was in the kitchen. It was just a sudden migraine, and this phone charger that I had wrapped up just suddenly jumped off the counter. I said, that must have been very scary for you. Let's go and take some readings. And their electromagnetic frequency coming out of that particular part of the wall was like at unhealthy levels. It's like, they say, living next to power lines can give you cancer, kind of unhealthy levels of that. And they had this power strip set up with other power strips set up to it. The wiring in the wall was over 70 years old, and so let's reenact this. So we get the actual phone charger. She said jumped off the counter. I said, well, how did you have it wrapped up? And she wraps it up for me. I said, oh, it's pretty tightly wound. And we set it down, and and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna do what you were doing, and I'm putting pots down on the counter, and it didn't jump off the counter, but it did unwind like a spring. And she's like, oh, and I'm like, okay, so there is a rational explanation. And she's like, oh my God, and they had us come and investigate 3 times in total. They tipped us each time. They were really good tippers. They were able to fund a lot of the equipment we needed to perform our investigations. And the end result is, I don't know if I mentioned it in the book, but the Paranormal Research and Development Society, from its foundation through our phase of amateurs, we're still amateurs. We like to say that we practice ignorance of the afterlife because we just don't know what they are. My faith, I told you in the last one, my faith says they're demons, and I don't want to talk to them if that's the case anyway. But we try to approach with this idea that if there are hauntings, which we believe they are a lot less common than people think they are. Everybody wants to say my house is haunted, and the ones who are willing to be rational about it, they'll say, I don't want my house to be haunted, and I want to find any rational conclusion. I want to know that I'm not crazy, which is that something I brought up earlier. There's a stigma that comes with this, and we fulfilled our deal with the client. We did a few investigations. We also tested for this. This one's a big one too, and it's actually a proven fact. There was this scientist working in a lab. There's a whole article on it. I wish I brought my notes with me, but it is a quick Google. You just look up infrasound, and I think it's 19 hertz or 18.9 hertz. But it's basically a sound that you can't hear that vibrates at the exact same frequency as your eyeball. And so this scientist is working in a lab, and he keeps seeing movement. There's no one else there. He's moving by himself, and he's working in there, and he keeps seeing movement, and he's getting this feeling of absolute abject terror. So much to the point where he just leaves. And he comes back the next day, and everyone else is like, yeah, we're seeing like a white lady or something. So he notices, though, that there's these air vents, and they're blowing, but this blowing is producing a sound at a specific frequency, and he starts experimenting with the frequency, and it is known as the fear frequency. They even made a movie called The Fear Frequency. And a fun fact about this frequency is it can occur naturally and artificially in any home, on any property. It could be the wind blowing through the trees. But a long enough exposure to this frequency can cause feelings of dread, feelings of being watched, and it can cause you to think you're seeing ghosts. It'll cause visible hallucinations because your eye is literally vibrating at this frequency. And so we check for infrasound too, because you've got all of these external factors that could be a haunting. And if you can rule them all out, then you start going, okay, I think you've got a problem here. But here's the thing is also, we get the question, do you guys do exorcisms? Absolutely not. We're not rated for it. Contact your local parishioner. We could recommend one, but we don't do them because we don't know how. And we're not willing to have something follow us home or anything like that. But when it comes to things that scare us, we're not about wanting people to experience anything like the West Grand haunting or any of the other hauntings that other people in our group, and most of our members are with us because they want to know why. They experienced something visible or something that was so horrific that it left a mark on them as indelible as the one that was left on me by my experiences, that they join up with us because they don't want to go out legend tripping. And legend trippers are people who go to scary places for the thrill. We're not doing this for the thrill. We're trying to find peace of mind while trying to find the answer why. There doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason, but we also don't think that, that there's an entire neighborhood block where everyone's house is haunted. You might have one place, on a city block that's genuinely haunted, and that might even bleed over to a few places in the neighborhood if it's intelligent and wants to. But everywhere, probably not, and I don't want to ruin the idea of, spooky things for people, especially with October right around the corner. But there is some degree of responsibility when we do this kind of thing, when we engage with people, when we discuss these ghost stories. They're fun to tell if you have never actually experienced it yourself. And it's like, people saying, oh man, I think a gunfight would be exciting. You have no idea what it's like to be shot at. You can't wish for something that you haven't experienced, because there's a dozen cops and there's a dozen, veterans out there who will tell you it is not a good time. And it's the same thing. These people who have actually experienced legitimate hauntings, it's not fun. It's not thrilling. It's almost, like, kind of makes us want to warn people away from it. Don't mess with things that you don't understand because you can't see them. And just because, if you're out there with your friends up in the attic playing with a Ouija board, whatever you're talking to has the ability to lie. It's not necessarily, or in my case with my beliefs, it's definitely not telling you the truth. But we practice on the clock, as we like to say. We're non-sectarian, so we try to come in specifically following scientific principles, scientific steps of, from hypothesis to conclusion, and we have the goal of putting someone at ease. Let's disprove everything we can, and if there's still something there, then we'll try and work with you to find help, to get rid of it, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I can appreciate your angle and your method and your idea. I think most of what people attribute to the paranormal, ghosts or hauntings, can be explained away. Maybe not easily, but it can be when someone is there searching, for the answers, like you would when you go into a place and you know what you're looking for by what they tell you that they might be experiencing. I really believe most of it can be.
Did you know? Because I didn't mention this, but this is actually an important factor. And I think that a lot of people out there who quote unquote ghost hunt or perform paranormal investigations, I believe genuinely that they mean well. I know that they have their own beliefs about ghosts, and I know they have their own beliefs about hauntings. I think that they come into it with as much desire to believe something as everyone else. And the way that we perform our function, we perform silent and blind investigations, meaning the person who takes the call, right? Our client comes in, they tell our screener, hey, this is what we think is happening. Our screener turned around, does not tell us what they think is happening, and the clientele are advised not to tell our investigators either, so that we don't have any preconceived notion. We don't know what we're looking for. And, as far as what the symptoms of their alleged haunting is. And we tell them, we like to not classify things. We don't refer to them as ghosts or demons. We call them afterlife entities, because on the clock, we're practicing a non-sectarian scientific approach. So if there is an afterlife entity here, I don't want to know what the issue is. The things that you can tell me that we can attempt to replicate, that's fine. But if there's something that that's going on, we want to find it on our own, so that we can say, afterward, after the investigation's over, if I'm hearing whispering in the attic and I come down and my partner goes up and he's hearing whispering in the attic, I don't know he's heard it yet, And then afterward, when we compare notes and we see that we're both hearing the same thing, and then we bring them back to our screener and says, oh yeah, they were hearing whispering in the attic, we have something legitimate to follow, We have something that wasn't a suggestion, because the human mind, man, that's the thing, is it's so complex, and yet it's constantly lied to. Like, we stare at a picture, a swirly looking picture that's static and stationary, and you move it around, and to the human eye, it looks like you're looking into a spiral, or, all of these different things. There's an experiment that I often show to our clients. I bring along a piece of paper that has a a black grid printed out on it, and I let them look at it and say, how many white dots are on the grid right now? And you see these white dots look like they're sparkling all over the place, because as your mind's trying to take this picture in, it's creating blank spaces. Which in some cases, that's how I consider that, sometimes we think we see shadows in a hallway, or when you're sitting in a doorway and you see a slightly askew plane, it creates the impression that something's moving. We walk into these on a blind investigation. We don't want to know. We're fine if you come in and say, thank you for coming. We're really scared. We don't want to be crazy. We're here to put your mind at ease. We're going to go ahead and do this. Please don't tell us anything until we're done with this investigation. Then we'll compare notes. And that's how we go about it. You ever watch taps like Ghost Hunters, right? Everything's always, oh, did you see that? Did you hear that? And as soon as you say that, your case is contaminated because you've put something in someone else's head that something moved or something made a sound. And even if they didn't hear it before, they're going to now, because they've become hyper vigilant and they're expecting to see and or hear something. It's why we do it blind, is because we recognize, our own weaknesses psychologically, the way that our mind works. We understand that our brain is going to lie to us. We know it. And we can't trust feeling, because feeling doesn't prove anything. Feelings, like I said, things like EMF and infrasound can create false positives inside of us. It causes us to see, feel, and even hear things that aren't really there, on top of things like audio and visual pareidolia. And we don't want to just dismiss anything per se. We take everything seriously. We're not coming in to automatically confirm something you want to be, nor are we going to come in and automatically say, no, you're fine. And the thing is, we can get into pseudosciences all day long, because there's just such an incredible and fantastic reaffirming Gnosticism to it. It fills in the blanks that we can't answer, but that's why, we're not a favorite among other paranormal groups out there. They don't like us much because they think that we're taking the fun out of this. And what we're actually trying to do is we want to prove it. We want to prove the why, or we want to prove the how. And we can't do that if we're just willing to say, okay, well, this was, Lawrence Thomas, and he fought in the Civil War, based off of something we picked up from a Ouija board, right? You might see and this is an actual phenomena, you might see the name Lawrence Thomas and fought in the Civil War, just walking through a graveyard, having seen the headstone once and never looked at it again, walk into a place and be like, boom, this proves that his headstone's at the cemetery. Our minds don't. They have a fantastic way. I mean, I'm a writer. I like writing stories, fiction and nonfiction. But when I'm writing fiction stories, man, my brain is making things up a mile a minute. Every single thing is like, every time someone buys a fiction story from me, I've been paid to lie to them and to get them to lie to themselves. While you exist in that moment in a fiction story, you're writing the lie and you're writing the high. And the same thing comes when you're dealing in reality. If you apply these pseudosciences, it's refreshing and reaffirming. It's like reading an op-ed article that happens to agree with your point of view. So we're not favorited by people, but we also know that there is a responsibility when we're working in the public trust, not on a governmental level, but when we're going into someone's house, someone has invited us into their home. We're not going to sit there and feed them this incredible story, or it's just the ghost of a child in your home. Especially if something is there, we're not going to be like, oh, it's a harmless child, you're fine. Just talk to it. In fact, we go by the Exorcist rules. Yeah, don't talk to it, don't name it, don't acknowledge it, don't invite it to talk to you, don't invite it to exist in you, don't do anything to provoke it. Just if there is something here, we'll try and help you find a way to handle it. And, with Halloween right around the corner, it's especially this time of the year, you get these things where everybody wants to be spooky for spooky season and play with their crystals and play with their copper divining rods and their pendulums and their Ouija boards. And it's pretty down the middle. There's like a 50-50 argument going on whether or not these things are dangerous. And I would say, right, when we're growing up, we're little kids, especially for those of us who lived in the 80s, stranger danger, don't get kidnapped era. The first thing that mama tells us, that teachers tell us, don't talk to strangers, right? And those are the strangers we can see. If you think you've got something in your house, the last thing you're going to do is just start talking to it, or you can't see it. You don't know who it is, if it's telling you the truth or it's lying or what it is. And I can promise you, though, it's not little Abigail Annie from 1755 who misses her parents and wants her teddy bear. It ain't that. You don't bother going in a graveyard. They didn't die there, and they're not haunting it. If you want to go by the old school rules, that they stick where they died, and if you want to go by the more scientific method, you don't know what it is. And I wouldn't go swimming in murky shark infested waters myself, and I wouldn't recommend anyone do the same. And that's analogous to, attempting to speak to forces or mess with forces or trying to reason with forces that are so alien based off the sheer fact that we don't know how they think or if they are human. And if they're what I believe in my faith off the clock, then you definitely cannot possibly understand an inkling of the way their thought process works, and it would be a fool's errand to try.
For sure, 100%. And a few minutes ago, you had mentioned something about the paranormal investigating, and then you touched on like shows and TV shows and how they can be dramatic, and I kind of think they need to be, to a certain point. It is a TV show, and they're there to entertain. I'm pretty sure they're pressured by producers to make things happen, or just
oh no, absolutely right.
That's just how it has to be. Because if they were really there and just kind of being real, so to speak, it would probably be a very boring show most of the time.
Oh no, like 100% of the time. It would be, because now they're not talking to it. There's no EMF. There's no EVP. They're just walking around. They're like, well, it's a nice house you got here. Copper pipes, huh? Might want to change those for something more modern. Okay, bye.
Exactly. Yeah, they need to entertain. So there just has to be some. Though I think some of them go a little overboard with the drama.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I want to clarify. Like, I get that those shows are mostly entertainment. I think that they have a passion about it, and I think that they actually do enjoy real investigations, and I think they also know they want to make sponsors and board of directors happy, and everyone wants to collect a paycheck. And that's the thing is that I can excuse, but as our paranormal research and research and development group, we were in a number of paranormal groups on Facebook for quite a while, and everyone and their mom has one, and that's fine. But when you watch their investigations, they also add the music and they add the spooky sounds, and they emulate what they see. And what that does is it also kind of, I guess, in a way, it kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of steals from our credibility. It discredits us from the people who are actually trying to figure it out, because now the public at large genuinely believes that this is how it's run. It's a sideshow, because all these groups are emulating an entertainment factor, and they come in and they do these things, and it's we brought a psychic with us. Okay, maybe psychics exist, maybe they can't. I can't disprove it personally, so I won't speak for it either way, because I don't want to go the Houdini route where I'm standing in front of that. By the way, Harry Houdini, huge discreditor of the paranormal. Did not like them. Took it to Congress. Almost had a law passed. It is why modern psychics have to actually register. And it's why all psychic networks have to say for entertainment purposes only. You could thank Houdini for that, but I don't want to discredit them personally. But you get them and they come in and you get this person you've never met before, and they're like, "There's something evil in your house, and we need to get a blessing right away." And now you've terrified your client. You've made a definitive statement that you can't withdraw. And that, if you withdraw it, your credibility is gone. So now you either have to stand by it or double down. And you have put these people in a situation where either they're going to bring in a church or a rabbi or whatever it is they believe. And then aside from that, they might want to move out. And I see it so often in the forums. Your house has someone posts a picture online and an online psychic looks at it and says, "There's an evil demon in your house. You need to move out now." And I think that, like, when I talk about the responsibility, that's what I'm talking about. Why would you do that to someone? How can you make such a definitive statement? And you're right about the entertainment factor. For shows, I have nothing against it. I watched them. I enjoyed the spook factor, but the reality of the side, like I moonlit as a fugitive recovery agent for a couple years, and I'll tell you right now, everyone wants, like, I probably can't say it, they watch certain bounty hunter shows, right? And they're like, "Man, this is exciting." It is not. Like, 8/10 of the job is research, and there's the other 2/10 of that job might be exciting for a minute, and it's also incredibly dangerous. And I approach paranormal investigation in the same light. A majority of it is incredibly boring, but if you've got time, I do have one particular incident that we actually just declared the property haunted.
Yeah, sure.
So, you're familiar with Corona. And in the last one, I had told you about the old Ganal estate that's been torn down now. And they were going to put up housing tracts or a mall, but unfortunately the property's on this fault line. So building commerce businesses, the investors dropped it. I don't know what's there now, but back in the day, I told you, my buddy said, you want to see a real haunted house? We investigated that as our group for years. And it was one of those things where it never let us down. Just walking onto that property, which, by the way, for anyone listening, if you're doing paranormal investigation, get permission. Trespassing is a real thing, and you can get in real deep trouble for it. Having admonished in that advance, we did enter that property a lot. And every single time it was, and when I say terrifying, you set foot there and you're having heart palpitations. I brought my mom up there once. She was like, my heart hurts. I'm like, yeah, it's weird, right? And we would go up there and we did some late night excursions to go and check this place out. And the real impact, the first time that we had a real impact, we pulled up there, we came out, and we're walking around the property just being like, yeah, this is weird. And we're about ready to just pack up and go home. And you get this, what sounded like almost like a music box. We're all talking, and my brother Alan, he goes, hey, shut up. Everyone shut up. No professional decorum, I guess. But we all dummy up, and you hear this music. And it sounds like a music box. And by this time, I told you in the last podcast episode, this property was gone. The first time there was an accidental fire. Second time an arsonist tried to take it. Third time, city of Corona came down and burned it down because it was a fire hazard. So we're just walking an empty property and there's this music box and there is no explanation for it whatsoever. We looked around because maybe we tripped over something and activated a music box, first logical conclusion. But following the music box, then we got what sounded like church bells. And the acoustics, you could say, maybe you're hearing a church across town. It's possible, but extremely unlikely because it sounded like it was right next door to us. And it didn't play the familiar, every hour on the hour sound that we would hear when bells would go off. And when the bells did finally chime a number, it chimed 16. We counted 16 chimes, and that didn't make sense. And we were a bit, shaken by that. It was the first time I had heard something that didn't have an explanation. I'd seen plenty of things, but we got some brass, got our gumption up, and decided we'd try and go in the direction of the bells. And we're walking up this gravel pathways. And there's a fair amount of us, and we're walking in this direction in the dark. We have a flashlight for the entirety of us, and we all stopped dead in our track because we heard someone walking toward us, and we're like, "Oh God, it's going to be security or the cops are here." I don't know, but we're in our 20s, and we stop, and there's someone walking toward us, and it's making an audible sound. The gravel is crunching. They're footsteps. And it's not it's a coyote, a fox, or a deer, which are all common out in that area. There's nothing there, man. And, we're looking and audibly, I'm thinking, okay, this has got to be 30 feet away from us. And instinctively, all of us, we didn't even know it. We were all backing away slowly, facing that direction, but backing away because we didn't want to turn our back to it. We didn't know it was coming. And if it was an animal, you don't run. And its pace picked up. Footsteps became kind of like speed walking, and then speed walking became running, and that's when we ran. This thing, it hit about probably what we would have estimated was maybe 15 feet from us when we turned around and hauled tail out. And I was the last one in the group taking up the tail, and I could hear it behind me. And it was running fast. And the thing that got me is we get back to the entrance, and we're out on the other side of the property. And I turn around and look, and there's nothing there. But you could hear footsteps in the gravel, but it wasn't disturbing the gravel. And I thought that was probably the scariest thing we ever encountered. And so naturally, a week later, we went back at the same time. And fortunately, we didn't get the footsteps, but we brought a newcomer with us. Somebody who wanted to cut his teeth on an investigation. And I remember the music started almost on cue. The jewelry box music, that music box sound, started maybe 10 minutes earlier than it had the time before. And it was also a different tune, which struck me as strange. And that night, there were 12 of us there. It was about 2 a.m. And I keep thinking, we're out of our mind doing this. And, New Blood's out there. He's like, I'm so nervous. And he starts smoking a cigarette. And I remember one of our guys actually almost started crying. He wanted to go home. And I felt a little bit annoyed about that, but also incredibly empathetic because, the annoyance was was because we were in the middle of what I considered to be like a potential discovery. But the empathy was, I know exactly how he was feeling when he said, I want to go home. I want to be as far away from this as possible because whatever's going on feels like a very real threat. Unfortunately, fortunately, we did not get, the footsteps in the gravel this time. But I said it was about, 2 in the morning, had just turned. And as we were leaving, the bell started and it played a different melody. And then it chimed 12 times at 2 in the morning. And there was 12 of us. And we got a little apathetic. I won't lie, where we just kind of decided that meant there was 12 of us and 12 bells. So we're leaving now. And that really was the last trip we went up there. We was like, okay, you know what? We can't prove it, but we're going to say it's haunted. It's dangerous. And let's not ever go there again. And let's talk everybody else out of going there again too. And also, private property. Let's encourage people not to trespass. And that was probably the second scariest experience as far as paranormal goes that I've ever had.
Did you guys have any recorders that picked up any of these sounds, the bells or the music or anything?
And that was one of those things where you're like, I wish I did. We were still in our infancy. So, much like every believable ghost story that I've ever heard, unfortunately, this is anecdotal. And in a weird twist of irony, anytime that I have brought recorders with us, like I said, we never talk to them, but we'll record audio and video while we're walking through an investigation. And if something comes up, we listen. But I've never actually picked anything up as far as EVP, either in video or audio. I know that's anticlimactic. It really is, but it's just the reality of what I do.
No, it is what it is. Exactly. And I know it's been probably a while since you had any investigations or done. I know you're slammed with your writing recently, right? I'm sure that's what you're focusing on at the moment.
Oh my gosh, it won't. The story won't shut up. I haven't had a break. I piled through 2 books, and I'm already 10,000 words into the new one, 12,000 now.
Whenever you do get back into the investigating or the research, if you ever decide to, be sure to reach out to me. And when you have some findings, you can come back on and let me know what you found. But yeah, the Colt County Diaries, right? That's what you're currently working on. If you want to just talk about that for a minute before we wrap it up.
Oh, I would love for the opportunity. So yeah, I'm a dad, and my eldest was Twilight is considered young adult, which is I don't know. There was a whole news media hubbub about how unhealthy the main character's obsession for the main vampire character. She sits by a window watching the seasons go by because her life can't continue because he's not there. And I started paying attention to these young adult novels because I had a daughter. She was 12 or 13 at the time. I want to say 12. And then I had a newborn daughter, and I'm like, I don't want my girls growing up with these different themes. Like they're great. I didn't like Twilight, but Divergent, that's a great story. And there's some really awesome young adult novels out there. But also teenagers read these things, and there's an awful lot of sex and violence, and there's foul language. I don't want my kids growing up thinking this is what real life's like or what real life should be like. And I don't want them to want what this life represents in these stories. Even if it's fiction, there is some degree of it that rubs off on us or makes us long for it. So I decided I was going to write a story for my kids. And actually it was 2012 when I started the first book in Colt County Diaries. And I ended up hitting a writer's block. I shelved it. And then just start of 2025, I picked it up again. And suddenly the story was back. I finished it, by July. I started in May, finished by July, picked up on the second story in July, got through it, and I'm currently on the third one. And this was great because the stakes in the story. It's funny. Your main character in this is this character named Quincy Cobblebottom. There's a lot of weird names in there because I'm shooting for a factor that feels mundane with the fantastic. There's no foul language whatsoever, but the danger feels real. There's really high stakes. No actual human on human violence. I have what I believe successfully blended, an adventure comedy with a little bit of genre bending in there, some existential dread, some scary stuff. But the main overall story, without being preachy, without being like a Saturday morning wholesome family show, it feels like something that we all did, as we remember what would be our last summer. Right? That last summer you had where you told your friends, hey, I'll see you tomorrow, and you never saw them again. It captures that feeling. It's that final real big adventure that we had And so, this story, I've got a beta reading audience, and I'm letting a few different ages. I've got a 70-year-old woman, one of my favorite people on earth. She's I can't name her because I didn't get her permission, but I let her read the first story, and she came to me later on, probably the most excited I've ever seen anyone. And she's like, I dreamt about it. I saw everyone, Quincy Cobblebottom, Melody Bell, Melody Danielle Bell, and Carly Fry and the twins. She's like, I dreamt about everything. Oh my God, can I read another? I'm like, absolutely. And I've let some my kids read it, and some other younger folks read it. So right now I'm looking at an audience that's with some other beta readers in between, that spans between about 15 to 70, apparently, that are enjoying the story. And if you're an 80s kid or a 90s kid, the nostalgia is there. The story actually takes place in 1996. And I did this on purpose because guess what? Quincy can't get in trouble and pick up his cell phone and call the cops or call his folks and ask them to come pick him up. He talks about dial-up modems in there and AOL. He does, and the whole "you've got mail" thing. That's still going on in his world. We're not all tethered to our phones and on the internet in 1996. So this story gives, a good adventure without it being unrealistic for, say, 2025. And my hope, is that when my kids read this, they see that, there's better things in the world, that you can have a lot of fun and you can have a lot of adventure without really getting into any real trouble. And it could be a good time. And this story tells it in a fashion that is honest, it's realistic, it's awkward. My main character, Quincy, he's got ADHD. And instead of, giving him the stereotypes, a squirrel, and he's constantly distracted, it shows his ADHD in the way that he hyper focuses. He's the perfect lead character specifically for the tasks that are set for him, because he would notice things that other people won't notice. And his asides and his jokes and everything, very, very funny, off the wall hilarious, because he could be sitting and worrying about, girls one moment, and the next moment walking into a situation where he knows he shouldn't be there. And he goes, just to quote one line, he's like, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. So obviously I walked right in, and he makes these comparatives to movies and music of the time that give you this feeling, kind of like, when I read the story, It Made Me Long to Be in 1955. I think it'll resonate with younger audiences and older audiences who remember what it was like that last real summer, or for people who want to experience that last real summer without, and having to embrace the concept that there has to be violence, sex, bad words, or any of those other things, while still seeing that the adventure, the stakes, and the danger is real, and there's other ways out of it.
That's awesome. And that's exciting. I'm excited for you. When you're about to publish, be sure to let me know when you're going to release, and I'll definitely want to make a mention that for you.
Oh, I'm going through like a soul-crushing process. I love Madhouse Books. I know they're on a break right now as far as publishing new authors go for new talent. I'm not trying to go indie with this one. I am trying to get an agent, because I would love, if not someone from the Big Five, a larger publisher, because this story should be something that people see. If I could get an agent, hopefully it's a good enough story, but if I can get an agent and go Big Five, that kind of marketing will take care of itself, and the story will get the attention that it earns.
I'm hoping so for you, for sure. And again, be sure to let me know when it's coming out.
Absolutely.
We'll give you a mention there. But Mike, appreciate you coming back and buttoning up your story and sharing the West Grand Haunting. I really do appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here, and be sure to come back and let me know if you have any future investigations and things you want to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. I love that you had me on. I'm honored to be on your show, man. You're an awesome host. I have a lot of fun with you, and unfortunately, we're like 7-Eleven. We're always open, but we're not always doing business. So if we do get anything new, I'll let you know about it. I'm sorry some of it happened to be kind of anticlimactic. I hope that doesn't put anybody out for your listeners.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate you being here. You can catch this show wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our website, accountsoftheparanormal.com, where you can access full episodes, as well as links to all our socials and our YouTube channel, where you can listen and watch along with visual images. And if you're a fan of what you heard here, please like, share, follow, subscribe. I appreciate the support. And if you have an account to share and you'd like to be on the show, email me at show@accountsoftheparanormal.com and tell me what you saw. I'll see you next time.